All right. Hello out there. Welcome one, welcome all. Got a new microphone set up. So if there are any issues with that, let me know. Hopefully, this should be streaming on Substack as well as X and YouTube. So if anybody can fill me in with any issues with that as well, that would be helpful. Um, if you have a question or you want me to address something, put it in the comments. YouTube is most helpful because it kind of seems to sort them. And of course, if you want to give a super chat, that's always nice. But I'll I'll go through the comments on unrelated issues at the end. So stick around for that if you want. So the main purpose for my doing this stream is because I posted an little article or post today on my journey to see if I could spot the mysterious drones that have been reported in New Jersey. It seems to be all anybody can talk about. So I put my journalist hat on and went out and did some good old fashioned journalism, which anybody could do. I mean, it's hardly even journalism in any real classic sense. I mean, going and driving around looking at the sky is not exactly the most uh, journalistic activity, although maybe it's a form of journalism. So let's not get into the semantic debate. Um, so as I wrote in the article, and I put it in the comments section on, or in the description box on YouTube, and I tweeted it earlier, and it's also on Substack, obviously. So you should have gotten a notification for that if you're subscribed, which of course you should. Um, I stipulate up front that I could very well be suffering from some form of confirmation bias. I think more people should be cognizant of their propensity to be afflicted with confirmation bias, not just on this issue, but in many facets of life, because I think it's a healthy cognitive habit to cultivate, knowing how certain premises that you're operating from might cause you to absorb or interpret or process information in accordance with a certain preordained conclusion and could cause you to gather information and then only accept information that is confirmatory and to discard or disregard other information that is disconfirmatory. So, for the purposes of this drone spotting expedition, the confirmation bias would be I am seeking out confirmatory information for the premise that I'm about to go see some mystery drones. And I might be disinclined to put as much premium on information which might contradict that premise that there must be this abundance of mystery drones out there in the sky. And this is unusually susceptible to confirmation bias in this respect because it's not as though I was just out in a field somewhere for an unrelated reason or, frolicking through a pasture and I just happened to look up and spot a bedazzling drone in the sky that I don't recognize. And just so people know, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm just going to use the word drone as a stand-in term. Maybe object would be better. I don't know for a fact that any of these things are drones. Obviously, I'm just using it to stand in for whatever people are viewing, without making any assertion about the object's true provenance. So, if you go out searching for something, obviously the intent of the search is going to create a whole confirmation bias dynamic where I'm predisposed to believe or assume or suspect or have a conjecture that whatever objects I might see in the sky are part of this um, supposed onslaught of drones that have been reported in the media, have now created like a mass. I wouldn't say panic. I don't know how many people are actually panicked about it. I don't see anybody really running around with their hair on fire. Um, Nor do I see anybody who seems particularly hysterical. So there could be a mass hysteria element to it, but I don't see anybody who's particularly hysterical. Although, I'm open to being proven wrong. Maybe there are lots of hysterics who are rushing around in just a manic frenzy that I haven't happened to encounter. So I'm very much prone to confirmation bias in even undertaking this little excursion. That all said, as far as my visual perception is at all reliable, I have to say that on Friday night, this was around 8 8:30 p.m. I was driving in the vicinity of Picatinny Arsenal, which is a US military facility. It's been in the news a lot lately in Morris County, New Jersey, which seems to be the hotbed for a lot of these sightings. And maybe about a mile or so outside the perimeter of Picatinny Arsenal, as I was driving down like a state road, I saw an object in the sky that struck me as very much one of these quote unquote drones that people have been saying that they've observed, or at least one variation on them. It had multiple red lights. It was hovering. It was not moving up, down, left, right. And I had eyes on it for maybe 10, 15 seconds. It wasn't enough time, sadly, to whip out my phone and try to snap a photo. And I probably couldn't have done so while abiding by like driver safety protocols because I don't want to be, trying to uh, do multiple tasks at once while I'm driving. Although I should say I am pretty good at multitasking while driving. It's not the safest thing in the world, and maybe those are some famous last words one day. But in any event, it wasn't enough time to get it all together. So I just looked at it out of my uh, window for 10, 15 seconds. And yeah, it looked like a drone or an object, large. It was larger than a standard commercial sized drone, as far as I'm aware. I know that people's depth perception when they're looking at the sky, especially at night, is very unreliable. So I'm not trying to ascribe any particular reliability to my observations. I'm just relaying them to you. And it hovered there. I saw there was only one. I know people have seen that there have been like packs of them or swarms of them or what have you. But here in Rockaway, New Jersey, what I saw was one of them in the sky, relatively low, stationary, hovering. I didn't hear any noise. Didn't hear any unusual noise. My car I was inside my car, so maybe I just missed it. I don't know if that means it doesn't emit noise or I just couldn't hear it because of the altitude or whatever. But I did not hear a noise, and yep, I saw it, and like that was when like I said, okay, I've seen what people are saying that they have seen. Um, and I can't prove one way or another that there's any causal relationship between my observation of this drone about a mile or so away from the perimeter of Picatinny Arsenal, and the fact that we were in that vicinity. How can I know? I mean, I think a fallacy people often engage in on the internet, just in ordinary reasoning throughout life, is to make unfounded causal inferences. And then that leads to ill-founded premises on which they operate and then process new information, and the confirmation bias issue kind of rages out of control. So I don't make any huge extrapolations from what I saw in terms of the ultimate provenance of these objects or what the purpose is or who's behind them or whatever, other than to say that I saw this object in the sky. Okay. So I can give some firsthand testimony that what people are observing to some degree is real. Okay. If you don't believe me or believe anybody, feel free to come to Morris County, New Jersey. I'll take you on a little road trip and we can go look for ourselves. Um, I know there have been sightings many other places, but I figured I would go to the main hotbed. It's an area I'm familiar with anyway. And I saw it. So, what does that tell me? Well, it doesn't tell me very much other than I can report this visual sighting. It's not that exciting. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, this is Iran or this is some Pentagon cover up. I don't know. Like, nothing that I saw visually necessarily lends itself to any other larger explanation. And I like to go on facts. I don't try. I try. People could speculate or make conjectures. I tend to find that not especially fruitful, especially when they take the form of factual assertions that based on information people can't possibly have and derive from knowledge that they can't possibly possess. So I can't possibly possess what the ultimate explanation is. All I can tell you is I saw it. Okay. And I had never seen, to my recollection, an object like that in the sky. And it was definitely not a plane. I know people have claimed to have seen certain objects that more resemble a plane, like they look like they're fixed wing aircraft. And later on in the night, I did see one that looked like that. But as I mentioned in my article, it kind of did more resemble a plane to me to the point where I'm not as confident that what I saw was one of these was like a non-plane. Okay. But the first one that I saw was definitely not a plane. It looked like more of a traditional drone, but larger. People say that it may look like the size of a small car. It sounds roughly correct to me. Although, again, how much confidence do I ascribe to my ability to depth percept or perceive uh, in the night while driving? Not a whole lot. Like, there's not a whole lot of. What problem with this whole story is there's limits to how much people can perceive from the ground when they're looking at the sky. And there you have it. So, how much of this could be mass hysteria? Well, a component of it could be mass hysteria. There could be confirmation bias. I'm subject to confirmation bias. You are too. So, a lot of people going out now with the intent of seeing something in the sky to confirm this narrative that has now gained so much traction, that could lead to a lot of confirmation bias. There's no doubt about it. However, on the other hand, I saw an object. Okay. Um, and even weeks ago, I spoke to somebody who told me about these sightings in the same area well before it became a national story. So there wouldn't really have been much reason, there wouldn't have been much confirmation bias potential in the ether when I was first told about this a couple of weeks ago. I frankly didn't pay much mind to it. Just kind of brushed it off, really. But now I have seen at least one. I next saw what more resembled a plane, so I have less confidence that this was one of the mystery drones, but it could well be. I think it's what a lot of people are claiming that to be mystery drones. It was at higher altitude. This was a mix of red and green lights. It was moving in a fixed direction. It wasn't moving erratically, it was moving just in one direction. And, if I wasn't looking for it, I would have just assumed it's a plane, but I don't know. Um, but again, the first one I saw was the more decisive one for me, for sure. So is this a mass hysteria? Well, I think to dismiss it as mass hysteria, even if there is a mass hysteria component, is not going to be effective at all in allaying anybody's issues. And there are too many people who are not particularly, I've heard testimonies from too many normal people. Okay. to think that this could possibly be overwhelmingly explicable by mass hysteria. Again, there has to be some component to it. I wouldn't be surprised if a large percentage of the sightings are false positives or what have you, but it can't be entirely that. That's just me trying to use my reasoning facilities. Okay. But here's a mass hysteria component that I think so it makes no sense to just dismiss the broad mass of people who are saying that they've seen these things as succumbing to hysteria. If you want to be worried about the potential of mass hysteria, worry about the politicians, worry about people in positions of power who, whatever the provenance of these objects, are clearly thirsting for an opportunity to posit the existence of some nefarious threat, probably with a foreign origin, and then they can use that to, in the most extreme, agitate for some military reprisal. Who knows, against Iran? That's probably the most plausible one to me. Also, Russia, China, North Korea. The big newfangled axis of evil that people love to talk about. Although it's not an axis anymore because they try to claim that like North Korea is a junior partner to the axis. Whatever. The standard cadre of scary foreign adversaries. There are lots of people in positions of power who would love if this was just if this provided them with a basis to agitate for, number one, military action of some kind, or at the very least, number two, ramping up military industrial expenditures, which they can claim have extra necessity because of the potential for drone incursions. So it almost doesn't even matter what the origin of these things are in terms of potential interested parties using this episode to galvanize public fervor around their preferred initiatives on the international stage or in terms of domestic military production. So you've probably seen some of these clips that I've tweeted out, if not from me, from somebody else. But I'm going to now pull up my feed here, and you'll have to bear with me for just a moment as I present the clips to you. Okay, so here's what I said today, and I stand by it. It would seem the primary hysteria that to be worried about right now are, I guess I should have said is, elected officials chomping at the bit. I know people try to correct me that it's champing or spelled champing. That's kind of an anachronistic spelling that's more associated with British pronunciation of English, just for any of the pedantic people out there who want to correct me on that. Chomping at the bit to attribute the drone sightings to the typical cast of scary foreign adversaries in hopes of whipping up a war fervor and or funding more military industrial expenditures. So it might be too late for this NDAA bill that's currently going through the Congress, as usually happens every December. If the House passed its version last week, and the Senate has to take up their version, and they'll go to a conference committee and try to come up with the bicameral bill. Although I wouldn't rule out that even in these waning weeks of this congressional term, somebody could slip in some provision to the NDAA to fund something that they say is needed for anti-drone surveillance or whatever. Actually, that now that I think about it, that's pretty probable because the bill is not in its final draft yet, even though the House passed its own version. So who knows? But let's go to what Chris Smith, who is the Republican congressman from New Jersey, had to say yesterday afternoon or morning when he convened a big press conference with his local law enforcement partners and local elected officials. Now, Chris Smith, just if people don't know, nothing that's totally relevant, but like he's one of the most long serving members in the entire House. He's been in office since 1981. So he's been there for 44 years. He got elected when he was, I think, only 28. So he could easily be around for another 20 years. So we can have somebody who's, if he reaches the high end of the longevity spectrum in Congress, which is not unfathomable, he could be there for potentially 70 years. Because he's not that old yet. I think he's only 70, 72, something like that. Anyway, I only say that because over the course of his long and illustrious career, he's never met a military kind of boondoggle he didn't like, or a foreign entanglement that he didn't want to gin up support for. So it's not surprising to me that he's out there at the fore, making the most alarmist possible proclamations around this subject. Again, obviously there's something here that people are observing, but then there's another layer added on top of the story where you have interested parties with a political agenda of some sort, like Chris Smith. Number one, trying to use it as a partisan cudgel against the Biden administration, which, okay, fair enough. And then number two, using it to kind of bolster this sort of long-standing preoccupation he has with fighting foreign adversaries. So this could easily be used, and it already is, it seems, to advance long-standing American geopolitical interests, or at least interests as far as Chris Smith sees them.
And just remember, ladies and gentlemen, the feckless response to the Chinese Communist Party's spy balloon. When that thing traversed America and went over one very sensitive base, including the B-2 bombers base, after another, we did nothing except say, oh, it's a spy balloon. Or is it? Or is it a weather balloon? I still can't get over that one. The elusive maneuvering of these drones, I would suggest a major military power sophistication that begs the question whether they have been deployed to test our defense capabilities, or worse, by violent dictatorships, perhaps maybe Russia or China or Iran or North Korea. I mean, they have the capability, and they certainly have the motive. The Pentagon has said the drones are not ours. I've written Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin asking the Pentagon to authorize the use of force to down one or more of these unmanned threats to uncover the mystery. Bring them down over the ocean, over an area where there's no population. Bring them down and find out who's doing it. Knowing that drone warfare has radically changed warfighting in Ukraine and Russia, the Middle East, and elsewhere, this is not the time to trivialize or dismiss the threat.
Okay, so Chris Smith is saying that the sophistication of the drones indicates that there's some very sophisticated military force behind them. Now, here's the hysteria that I'm talking about. Here's the hysteria that people should be discounting and dismissing, or at least heightening their skepticism of, rather than like going around trying to tell individual citizens that they're in the throes of hysteria or they're not seeing what they're seeing. How about focusing on the potential dangers of this form of hysteria, which is a member of Congress going out and telling the public through this speculative rhetorical phrasing that he kind of frames as factual, although he has no firm factual basis for saying any of it. He's just inferring somehow that the alleged sophistication of the drones, and I don't know how sophisticated they are if everybody can see them. Like, wouldn't a really sophisticated drone be evading detection, right? Would a really sophisticated drone have some of the lighting schemes that are actually associated with as I understand it, FAA regulations. So how sophisticated could they be? I don't know. Either way, though, for him to be going out and making these pronouncements that he clearly has no evidentiary basis for, and if he does, he should share that basis, which he hasn't. That's fomenting a certain kind of hysteria. And that's a potentially dangerous hysteria, because if he can kind of confect a narrative around this, and I'm sure there will be plenty of other people who are more than willing to join in, that says our skies have been invaded by nefarious foreign actors. I mean, do I have to spell it out for you in terms of how that could be cited to mobilize a potential war posture or a military reprisal of some sort? Remember, many members of the incoming Trump administration, including Trump himself, have called for stuff like, or threatened, bombing Iran to smithereens. That's Trump's words. Trump called for bombing the entire country of Iran to smithereens, or he threatened, he called for that to be threatened against Iran. You have the incoming CIA director. Maybe I should pull this clip up. You have the incoming CIA director, John Ratcliffe, who has already claimed. Give me 1 second. You have the incoming CIA director, John Ratcliffe, already claiming, a few months ago now, that Iran has committed acts of war against the United States by, number one, allegedly hacking Trump campaign emails. That's a whole other incident that was very bizarre. And the media didn't even report these materials that we were told they had received from Iranian hackers, because they were so frozen into inaction by their desire to avoid abetting a foreign interference scheme. So it was like 2016 Redux, except now it's Russian. Instead of Russian interference, it was Iranian interference. And it benefited Trump, presumably, to not publish these materials that we were told had been hacked from Trump campaign servers or something. And then also Ratcliffe says that Iran has further committed an act of war against the United States by allegedly plotting to assassinate Trump, although Ratcliffe is much more conclusive in his language. So this guy is about to run the CIA. There's no controversy whatsoever virtually about his nomination, unlike a handful of others that Trump has nominated. So he's very likely to sail through the Senate with no issue. And if now this drone incursion, quote unquote, or whatever you want to call it, could serve as like an additional plank in a potential argument that might be made for military reprisal against Iran, which the Wall Street Journal reported a few days ago, the Trump administration or Trump transition people are at least considering options in relation to, then that's all the more reason why to push back on hysteria coming from the elected officials and not directing the opprobrium at ordinary people who are just relaying what they think they see in the sky. So just to remind you, here's what Ratcliffe said. This was, I think this was in September. Yeah, September.
It's no secret that that the Democrats want to obtain a ceasefire in advance of the presidential election coming up to help Kamala Harris. And in so doing, they're really willing to put politics above our national security. And it is troubling, Maria, because how far are they willing to go? Well, as you point out, they're willing to ignore acts of war. I mean, when our own intelligence community tells us that they're hacking into the Trump campaign to help Kamala Harris win the election, when they engage in an act of war of trying to assassinate President Trump, and perhaps most importantly, when they engage in the act of war of firing through its Houthi-controlled rebels ballistic missiles at 3 U.S. warships, and there had been no actions and no consequences to those acts of war by Iran, it unfortunately tells you how far the Democrats are willing to go to stop Donald Trump.
Okay, so I forgot about another claim that he made about a supposed act of war that Iran has committed against the U.S. He's saying that the alleged hacking of the emails, the alleged assassination plotting against Trump, and then also the furnishment by Iran of the Houthis with missiles that have been used against U.S. seacraft. Those are already 3 arguments that Iran has committed an act of war against the United States. And the Democrats are weaklings, according to Ratcliffe, the incoming CIA director, for not yet taking strong enough action in reprisal against Iran. And so, there's a groundswell, potentially, maybe groundswell is the wrong word, but there's a coalescence of an argument here among people who comprise Trump's senior-most sort of orbit to potentially launch action against Iran. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen. I'm just saying that the underpinnings of the argument that might be proffered are clearly here. And Ratcliffe articulated it. So if that argument could potentially be further bolstered by saying, on top of all these other alleged acts of war, Iran is somehow responsible through some cockamamie means of infiltrating the American airspace and putting drones in the vicinity of, even over potentially, military installations in the U.S., you could see how that could be marshaled in further into this argument that some people in Trump's orbit, including Trump himself, have been making about Iran's commission of hostile acts or even acts of war against the United States, and how it's necessary for there to be some full-throated retaliatory measures. So that's something to be mindful of. If you want to reprimand people for hysteria, reprimand people who want to use this episode to further objectives like the one that Ratcliffe just spelled out there. And now we're going to go to Jeff Van Drew, because he is a piece of work. A lot of you probably already saw this, but I'm going to replay it because I feel I must. If I could find it. I thought I had tweeted it. Maybe not. Okay, here we go.
In focus now, Republican Congressman Jeff Van Drew of New Jersey, member of the House Judiciary Committee on the Hill right now. How do you address this at this point?
Well, here's the real deal, Harris.
Get ready. Here's the real deal, straight from Jeff Van Drew. I love that preface. I'm not going to give you any more BS. I'm going to tell you the real deal. So buckle your seatbelts.
I'm also on the Transportation Committee, on the Aviation Subcommittee, and I've gotten to know people. And from very high sources, very qualified sources, very responsible sources.
If they're so qualified and responsible, why can't you tell us who they are? Like, why is there a identification secret? Like, shouldn't we all know who is asserting what's about to be asserted here by Jeff Van Drew? Like, these people are using him as their conduit, it seems, to make these wild claims about the alleged origin of the drone incursion. But let's hear what the rest.
I'm going to tell you the real deal. Iran launched a mothership probably about a month ago that contains these drones. That mothership is off, I'm going to tell you the deal. It's off the east coast of the United States of America. They've launched drones, is everything that we can see or hear. And again, these are from high sources. I don't say this lightly. Now, we know there was a probability it could have been our own government. We know it's not our own government because they would have let us know. It could have been.
So we know it's not our own government because they would have let us know. Okay. I don't know whether it's the US government or not, but the idea that it's impossible that some faction within the military or the security state or the intelligence services couldn't have had any role in what we're seeing now because they would have politely informed us if that was the case. That's hilarious.
Some really glorified hobbyists that were doing something unbelievable. They don't have the technology. But let's pretend that's possible. The third possibility was somebody, an adversarial country, doing this. Know that Iran made a deal with China to purchase drones, motherships, and technology in order to go forward.
Okay, so Iran made a deal with China to purchase motherships. Maybe they did. Can I see like the contract or the terms of whatever deal he's asserting there? Like, can we get it? Don't these people ever feel obliged? Like, if I was a member of Congress and I was going to make a very alarming claim that could have huge ramifications, I might feel like slightly obliged to substantiate what it is I'm saying with facts and evidence. So I don't know if there's this deal or not. There could be, but like maybe provide it so people can not just have to take your word for it as somebody who happened to get elected from a district in southern New Jersey, and therefore you're this authoritative voice that we all just have to nod and solemnly accept the wisdom of. That's an idea.
Forward. The sources I have are good. They can't reveal who they are because they are speaking to me in confidential.
Why can't they reveal who they are, and why are they speaking to you in confidentiality? Why don't they go haul them before a committee in Congress? Put them on Fox instead of you. Like, why are they confidential? There's no follow-up. Of course, Harris Faulkner on Fox does not ask any follow-up to get him to provide any additional detail that should illuminate why these people are speaking in confidentiality.
These drones should be shot down, whether it was some crazy hobbyist that we can't imagine, or whether it is Iran, and I think it very possibly could be, they should be shot down. We are not getting the full deal, and the military is on alert with this.
Look, you've given us some pretty dire information just here, and I want to make sure that our viewers are digesting this. Iran has the capability to pull up along our eastern seaboard and launch drones the size of an SUV into the skies of several states, particularly New Jersey, where we know the incoming president has a large home, also in the same county or nearby where some of these drones in New Jersey have been seen.
Okay, so I think Van Drew slightly walked back. That's the political punditry term. Slightly walked back his claim and kind of modified the certitude with which he was conveying that he knew this information in subsequent days. But pair that with what Chris Smith is saying. I mean, these are people from New Jersey, right? So they're representing New Jersey, and so they're in the public eye right now, in the national spotlight. And they're going around making claims like this that are hugely incendiary and which could be used to whip up a war of fervor. So again, my point is, if we want to scold anybody for indulging in hysterics, focus your ire on these guys. And yes, also focus your ire on the Biden administration, which clearly has no ability to engage in any kind of public communications. They did throw Mayorkas on TV today. Maybe I should pull up that clip where it was who's the Secretary of Homeland Security, who was impeached by the House Republicans earlier this year, and then the Senate Democrats took no action on it. But I mean, clearly this has reached enough of a fever pitch that you would think there would be some coordinated communications effort that's a little bit more robust on the part of the Biden administration, but maybe they just don't care anymore. Maybe they're just checked out. And, for the next month and a half or whatever, they're going to be just a bit missing in action. And so here's another little bit of, if you want to call it hysteria for everybody to bear in mind. So here's Mike Waltz, still a sitting congressman from Florida, did not resign way prematurely like Matt Gaetz. So he's still in office, but he's been named Trump's national security advisor, which it should be said, it's not even a Senate confirmed position. And I've been over this point before, but Trump could have appointed virtually anybody to the position of national security advisor and not even have to subject it to Senate confirmation. And this is who he picked, Mike Waltz, who is, every time I've interacted with him, everything I've ever seen of him really indicates that he's one of the most ardent militarists, interventionists, etc., in the House of Representatives. And so he's out now on behalf of Trump, speaking as his incoming national security advisor. And then here's another little piece of the hysteria, if you want to put it that way. It's not that Waltz is engaging in any visible hysteria here in these remarks, but look at one thing that he says here, and it should, I think, highlight where the skepticism ought to be directed around this issue. Again, not at ordinary New Jerseyans or New Yorkers or whomever happens to think they see one of these objects hovering in the sky, but the vested interests that could very easily use the public uproar around this issue and the media attention and the political snafu that it's created to serve certain policy initiatives that or advance certain policy initiatives that they had wanted to pursue anyway. So here he was today.
Well, I think what the drone issue points out are kind of gaps in our agencies, gaps in our authorities between the Department of Homeland Security, local law enforcement, the Defense Department. I think Americans are finding it hard to believe. We can't figure out where these are coming from. And I can tell you from the Defense Department standpoint, they're focused on bombers and cruise missiles, and it's pointing to gaps in our capabilities and our ability to clamp down on what's going on here. And we need to get to the bottom of it. And I think the Biden administration is working to do that.
But at this point, given the intelligence you...
So he says he thinks that the Biden administration is working on getting to the bottom of this. So if you recall, maybe you never saw this, but I think 2 weeks ago or so now, Waltz was being interviewed about Ukraine policy, and he said that he and Jake Sullivan, the incumbent national security advisor, were on the quote same team as it related to Ukraine. This was shortly after Biden authorized Ukraine to use U.S. missiles, ATACMS missiles, to strike targets deeper and deeper inside Russia. So Waltz didn't object to that. He actually said that he and the Biden administration were on the same page on this issue, and he's in regular contact with Sullivan. And notice he's not criticizing the Biden administration anymore. He's saying that they're just on this good faith quest to get to the bottom of it. So that's notable.
You've seen, is there any reason for the public to be worried?
Well, look, when you have sensitive sites like Picatinny Arsenal, you have, of course, President Trump's residence at Bedminster, and you have other no-fly areas. Those need to be enforced. We need to know who's behind it. But right now, I think law enforcement seems to be the Department of Homeland Security and the Defense Department are kind of all doing this and pointing at each other. So when we come in, how do we enforce these low-level, long loitering, could be dangerous drones? And one thing for people to appreciate, they're evolving so rapidly. It's not necessarily somebody that's just on the other end flying it. They could be following pre-positioned GPS coordinates. They could be coming from offshore.
So when he says they could be coming from offshore, that's what Jeff Van Drew was asserting. Waltz doesn't specify that they're from an Iranian drone mothership, but if they're coming from offshore, that lines up with the theory, or more like an assertion, that Jeff Van Drew was positing. And, in fairness, there have been sightings from seemingly credible sources. I don't know. I haven't interviewed the employee of the Ocean County, New Jersey Sheriff's Office, who we're told saw 50 drones coming off the ocean. So it's not like it's out of the question. I don't know what the origin of these things are, but given that uncertainty, there are things that I do know, which is that politicians and people in positions of authority are going to use this episode to advance their interests. So that's something maybe a little bit more worth focusing on, rather than crazy conjecture on the basis of knowledge that we can't possibly possess. But let's just finish this clip.
We need to take a hard look at our homeland defenses. President Trump has talked about an Iron Dome for America. That needs to include drones as well, not just adversarial actions like hypersonic missiles. We need to have an all of the above protection of U.S. airspace.
Okay, so his point there is that this whole drone fracas highlights the need for the U.S. to institute an Iron Dome for America program, which Trump had been promoting over the course of the campaign. It didn't get a whole lot of attention. But this could very easily be another massive Pentagon boondoggle. When we're told Trump is somehow opposed to the military-industrial complex, who do you think is going to be producing the quote-unquote Iron Dome for America? I'm very confident that there are a lot of defense contractors who are salivating at that opportunity, because throughout the decades there have been missile programs, missile defense so-called programs, like the Star Wars program in the 80s, famously under Reagan. It's just been giant boondoggles for the most part. So if this is the latest version of that, but now with extra urgency because of the so-called drone incursion, then it's very easy to see how this episode or this event could be used to advance certain longstanding policy wishes. And those policy wishes probably are going to be overwhelmingly favorable to vested interests in the national security state, in the military-industrial complex, if you want to use that terminology. So that's what I think is best to be mindful of. Okay. Anything else on this? Let me see. I mean, one thing that's funny is the idea that it's an Iranian drone mothership. So Iran is so advanced, so well-resourced, so ahead of the curve, that it somehow figured out how to send a giant drone mothership on a voyage across the globe to park off the coast of New Jersey and send its drones to infiltrate American airspace. But it had no ability, clearly, to do anything about the rapid disintegration of the Syrian government with which it was aligned. And now it has its transit points across Syria to send arms and resources to its satellite groups like Hezbollah. That's been totally blocked off now, as far as we know. So that would be a weird allocation of resources on Iran's part. And what are they getting from these drone incursions exactly? Just like making people annoyed? Are they all going to like drop a payload eventually and like blow stuff up? That seems improbable based on what we know of the drones. So anyway, let's see. I saw a few decent questions, I thought, on YouTube. Somebody says, Tracy seems so annoyed that he saw the drones. Why would I be annoyed? Because I wish that I could participate in some kind of cover up. And despite my best efforts, I'm no longer able to participate in the big cover up because I have to admit that I saw the drones. I'm not annoyed. I mean, maybe I'm annoyed in general. Maybe it's just my temperament, but no, I'm fine with it. The drones wanted to be seen. Think about that. Yeah, I mean, but that doesn't that contradict what Chris Smith was saying earlier, which is that the drones are so sophisticated and they demonstrate that they have this ability to be so elusive that it indicates a military power is behind it. I don't know. Maybe that's the case. I can't rule anything out. I don't know. But if they were really engaged in like ISR, which is like a surveillance or reconnaissance on behalf of some foreign power, then you think they would maybe want to avoid detection, but maybe not. I mean, maybe there's some, I don't know, psychological reason why they would want them to be visible to people and then create a frenzy. Look, I'm not going to rule anything out. I just, I can't rule out anything about the provenance of these objects. What I can rule in is that people ought to maintain their skeptical faculties in relation to political actors who are clearly trying to use this to make a name for themselves. Like there are tons of New Jersey state senators and assembly people who are like all over TV right now. And like it's an opening for them to kind of raise their profile, which I don't begrudge them for as a politician. I mean, that's what they do. But then the people who are already in positions of power, like the two congressmen that we've shown clips of, they could refrain, if they wanted to, from making seemingly unfounded conjectures about some nefarious foreign nexus here. But they're not. They're making very extreme, incendiary assertions about a totally unproven foreign nexus. So what does that tell you? It tells you that they think this could advance some interest that they have in terms of military spending, in terms of U.S. foreign policy, whether it's for the current administration or to exert pressure on the current administration, or probably more likely in the case of the Republicans for the forthcoming administration next month. So although we can't know with any certainty what the origin of these drones are, we can know with certainty that certain politicians are trying to exploit the situation. So that's where I would encourage people to aim their skepticism. If you want to accuse anybody of fomenting hysteria, please accuse the politicians. Accuse people who are knowingly trafficking in this incendiary threat inflation. Now, people could say, "It's how can you know that it's an inflation of the threat?" Maybe decent point. Maybe I shouldn't have used the term threat inflation, but they're clearly hyping a threat beyond what they could possibly know. Other than, Jeff Van Drew whispering to some source who has to remain secret for some reason because they're just too important for anybody to know who they are. What else? Somebody says, I thought it was going to be RFK's niece running the CIA or something. No. The CIA director nominee, whom Trump has already announced, is John Ratcliffe, who I played a clip of earlier. There have been reports that RFK Jr. is trying to promote his daughter-in-law, who was his campaign manager, who was a former CIA officer or operative. Amarellis, I think is her name. Forget her last name. To be a deputy CIA director, so that could happen. But no, the CIA director, the guy running the agency at the top, is Ratcliffe, who is basically already calling for a reprisal against Iran. And if he can now use this episode to if he could throw it in the mix into his constellation of justifications for a potential military action against Iran, then all the better for him, it would seem. Somebody mentions that Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio had to shut airspace for a time for multiple incursions. I did see that. There were also apparently also Stewart Airport in is it Westchester County? I think it is. Had to ceased operations for about an hour. I've never actually been to Stewart Airport. Maybe I should see if I can take a flight out of there at some point, just to, for no other reason. Then I mean, I'll interview people about what it was like to have to temporarily pause because of a drone incursion. Yeah. Somebody says probably hobby drones. I don't discount. That's some percentage of what people are seeing. Could be commercial or recreational drones. That seems likely to me. And again, stipulating that my ability to accurately perceive depth or size in the night sky is highly limited. But that all said, the thing that the one that I saw on Friday night hovering, that seemed to me to be much larger than any commercially available drone that I can recall seeing. Like definitely larger than the ones that you could get on Amazon or something. But who knows? I'm definitely not at all infallible on this. And like I said up front, very possible, even likely that I could be afflicted with very severe confirmation bias, just like lots of other people who have heard about this issue. They are now out stargazing and thinking that they see lots of stuff that might not be there. Tyler says, that's where I slightly disagree. I'm open to the slim possibility that there really is a threat they're looking for that would cause an even greater panic if we're considering all possibilities. I'm not discounting any possibility. I don't know. My point is I just don't know. And I do think that from like a journalistic standpoint or from a standpoint of a conscientious public citizen, if we're talking about how politicians are discussing this issue or how they're presenting it or portraying it, that if it seems like they are overwrought in their depictions of it based on information that they're either not disclosing or they don't have, which is probably more likely, then that's where I think the skepticism ought to be ramped up. So even if there's a slim possibility that there's a genuine threat, okay. But then that doesn't justify inflating the perceived threat based on evidence that you just don't have. So there's a possibility that it could be a World War III incursion, and by Wednesday of this week, we're all going to be dead. I mean, that's a possibility. I don't have any evidence backing that up. So therefore, if I went around saying this is World War III, we're all going to be dead in 3 days because of the drones, you would rightly accuse me of engaging in overwrought threat inflation. Likewise, that same interpretation can be applied to politicians who are way excessive and incendiary in their public depictions of what's going on. If you have evidence, present it. Like if there's evidence, I'm open to any evidence. So if there's evidence that shows that there's a genuine public threat, then you provide it. Otherwise, have some epistemic humility and don't make grand, wild assertions that you can't possibly substantiate. I know that's a lot to ask of people, especially politicians and a lot of people on the internet. Look, I mean, there are people who are fomenting hysteria, I would say, on social media who just will post anything for engagement or for views, and they don't do any fact checking or then don't do any verification, and they just want to like be inflammatory. But that's the case with any issue. So there's nothing you can really do about those hucksters. And it's like crying over spilt milk with them. But for the politicians, I mean, there is somebody more tangible to focus on if they're contributing unwarrantedly to public panic, right? And I think that's the case with Van Drew and Smith, who I've commented on. I forgot to mention, I went out again last night, a little bit more briefly to the vicinity of Earl Naval Station Earl, which is in central New Jersey, Monmouth County. Just drove around a little bit. I did not see anything. I don't know if it's because the mystery drones take the weekends off. Maybe they're on the federal work schedule. I don't know. But oddly, I do remember. Maybe this is not a confirmed report, but I do remember it being reported that the only night on which there were no drone sightings in New Jersey was Thanksgiving, which happens to be a federal holiday. Again, I don't even know if that's true. Maybe I shouldn't have even said it. Maybe I should have abided by my standards for promulgating credible information. But I do remember hearing that. Maybe people are seeing stuff on the weekend, but I just know that I went out again last night briefly and did not see anything. But I went to a different area of New Jersey, so maybe the hotbed in Morris County is what I should have gone back to. Michael says, I was hearing about frequent drone sightings over London for a couple weeks before the start in NJ. Yeah. The reports about apparent drone incursions a couple of weeks ago or more around U.S. military installations in the UK. I don't know about London itself, but I know that at various bases that the U.S. has a presence on in the UK, there were sightings or reports of these. So who knows? I mean, I've heard theories about how this global or international thing. I don't know. I'm one of you, man. I'm on an island. I happened to see one hovering in the sky in Rockaway, New Jersey on December 13th at around 8 p.m. That's my contribution. Lighthouse says there's no scenario in which the military does know what they are. You would think so. I mean, I think that's kind of comforting in a way for people to assume. But never underestimate the shocking and almost comical incompetence of the Pentagon bureaucracy. Does it seem implausible to me that they couldn't use radar technology or sensor technology that would give them a clue as to from where these objects take off and then land? Yeah, that's a bit implausible, but I put nothing past the Pentagon. I mean, there's a reason why they haven't passed an audit in many years. All right, people, thanks for tuning in. Somebody says, am I doing blow? What's with all the nose touching? I don't know. I just kind of do that as a nervous habit. I'm not nervous, but I just kind of touch my nose. Or I notice when I watch stuff back that I do occasionally, I end up, for some reason, I touch my face a lot. I don't know why. I'll try to avoid that, or who cares if I do it? All right, so go to mtracy.net, read the piece if you're curious. And I guess my purpose overall in writing that article or post today and then doing my little live stream was to kind of give people a sense of how I'm thinking might be most prudent to reason through what's happening, where you're not smugly dismissing anybody's claims. You're acknowledging the susceptibility of the public to mass hysteria or to wide-scale confirmation bias, while also trying to direct people's skepticism or frustration at the right or most optimal sources, which to me are the politicians who are trying to leverage this to pursue their initiatives, like bombing Iran, for instance. Okay, I'm going to wrap up now. Go to mtracy.net, and we will reconvene in the near future. So have a nice evening.